Hi, I'm Brian and welcome to my channel, This Fantastic Life. In this episode, I'm going to show you a slideshow of all the best photos from our most recent trip to the Southwest. So this is our 6th cross-country trip in our life. It was a 35-day trip, and we started the day after my wife retired from her job of 28 years. Now, if you've never driven cross-country, I highly recommend it. We did our first trip in 1992 in between my grad school and my postdoc. We were married 2 years at the time, took our best friend from high school along on the trip, piled in my dad's 84 Chevy Caprice, and drove for 33 days, 11,000 miles across the country, seeing as many national parks as possible. One of our goals in life is to get to all 63 national parks. So far, we've been to 60 out of the 63. There's something about driving cross country, just the magic of sitting behind the wheel, watching the open road, going where you want, and camping, along the way, just seeing all the beautiful sights, like your living room is changing every day. We did another trip in 2000, taking my dad along, showing him the country. Our daughter was about 1 at the time. We left her behind. And then in 2010, we took her along on our 3rd cross-country trip when she was about 10 years old. And that was a very formative time for her. And then I got into van life. So I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos with Eminem Beck and Trent and Alley, some of the old guard of the van life before it became really popular. And I started to search the internet for Class B camper vans, eventually found one and bought it in April of 2019. It had about 13,000 miles on it. It's a 2018 Dodge Promaster. You can see that in some of my earlier episodes where I give you a van tour. And in 2019, then I took that on a solo trip out to Idaho and Yellowstone, Teton Glacier, etc. And came back. That was my 4th cross-country trip. 2020, of course, was the pandemic, so we skipped that year. And then in 2021, I did a 43-day trip through the Michigan Upper Peninsula out to Utah and Colorado, and then over to California, where I joined up with my wife and daughter, and we did a week in Yosemite climbing Half Dome. See our previous episode of that. And then my wife stayed with me. We drove up Pacific Coast Highway to Oregon and Washington and came back via Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. And now, this was our 6th cross-country trip to the Southwest, and I'm going to show you exactly how I planned everything and show you just the best pictures from our trip. So in terms of planning, the first thing I did was I went on Google Maps, and after following a number of van lifers on YouTube and Instagram, I look at their pictures and I say, oh, this is a spot I haven't been, and it looks really interesting. So I mark it on a special vacation ideas map on Google Maps. And so I had a whole bunch of pins dropped on this map. And then I decided, okay, now let's get my maps from AAA and plot a route between these pins. And then, having some experience with cross-country travel, I know about how long it takes for me to explore an area. And I'm kind of go-getter. I don't stay in an area very long. It's something I'd like to change as I get older, but I like to be on the move right now and see as much as I can in the shortest amount of time. And so I mapped out my route and an itinerary. Then I rode away to the national parks, had them send me brochures, same thing with Chamber of Commerce, etc. Gathered all my information, went on all trails, looked up different kinds of trails I wanted to do, went on some boondocking apps that I have, like IOlander and Seeker and Campendium, and searched for potential boondocking sites in the areas. And I just kind of kept it kind of loose and flexible, but very well planned so that I had a good idea of what I might be able to see, when, and how and where I could boondock for free at night. I tried to keep as much flexibility in it as possible, only making 2 reservations along the way where I had to be at a certain place at a certain time. That way, if weather intervened or if there was some kind of problem with the van or something like that, I could always just skip ahead or make changes or what have you. So that's how I planned this trip. I hope you enjoy the slides. So we started out on Wednesday, May the 4th, one day after Jessica retired, and we drove 443 miles from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to just south of Lancaster, Ohio, where we went to Hocking Hills State Park. This is a state park that I wanted to go to for many years. It always books up, so I did make a reservation in advance. Here we did 2 trails. We hiked to Old Man's Cave, which was a 1.5-mile trail along these ledges that are very reminiscent of Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And over these nice stone bridges, here's a view from the inside of Old Man's Cave looking out. And then we did a second hike to Ash Cave, which was about 0.6 miles. It's also another ledge here where a waterfall goes over the edge of the cliffside and splashes into a pool down below. Absolutely beautiful and very stunning scenery. That's me standing down there at the base of the waterfall. And then we hiked a little bit to Cedar Falls and stayed overnight. Day 2, we get up at 5:30 in the morning and we left our campsite and drove to Hopewell Culture National Historic Park. This is the remnants of some Indian burial mounds. They only use this area for burying and for ceremonies relating to that. They did not live there. Then we drove past Devou Park, Memorial Overlook of Cincinnati, and on to Mammoth Cave, natural entrance. And Mammoth Cave, we've been there before, so we took a different tour this time, the Frozen Niagara tour at 4:15. This takes you in the only part of the cave, the world's largest cave in terms of miles of passages, that has speleothems. This is the only wet part of the cave. At the end of the tour, they show you these cave crickets. Day 3, we drove 649 miles from Mammoth Cave, Kentucky to Tulsa, Oklahoma, stopping at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. This is a place that Jessica always wanted to go. And then afterwards at the famous Hancock's Quilt Store, which just goes on and on and on. Had a nice Mexican lunch there in the van. And continued on into our 50th state, Oklahoma, the first time we've hit Oklahoma. Day 4, we drove from Tulsa, Oklahoma, all the way to Amarillo, Texas, where we went to Palo Duro Canyon State Park. And when we arrived there, it was 109 degrees Fahrenheit on the car thermometer. It was very hot for hiking. Palo Duro Canyon is the second longest canyon in the United States after the Grand Canyon. Then we drove to Roswell, New Mexico, where they have all the aliens, and I met this girl that was out of this world, and we stayed overnight in the Roswell Walmart parking lot. On day 5, we drove from Amarillo, Texas to Alamogordo, New Mexico, where we hit our National Park number 60, White Sands National Park. This is absolutely amazing. Driving in here is like driving on snow, and then you get to the end of the park and you can hike on the Alkali Flats Trail. We hiked out there 2.7 miles. 639 feet of elevation gain. It took us 2 hours because hiking in the gypsum sand is very strenuous. We started the trail at 77 degrees in the morning, and it reached 90 degrees by the time we were done our hike. A little bit later in the day, it was 101 degrees out on the sand, and so we decided to take a trip into Alamogordo to the New Mexico Museum of Space History. Very interesting museum on 3 floors. And beam me up, Scotty, here as you have a... And in the bathroom, they had a sign that was funny. It said, "Fun facts about Uranus." Then we drove back after seeing the Thunderbirds fly over the air show nearby. Drove back to White Sands for evening, where we had a picnic lunch, a dinner rather, and then went out on the sands again for sunset photos. 2 people on the hill there. Just watched as the sun went down. It got very windy in the evening there. Day 6, we drove 425 miles from Alamogordo, New Mexico to Tucson, Arizona. This is what we call our first van life detour. We were going to go to the Gila National Forest to see the Gila cliff dwellings and some hot springs, but we had heard about the forest fires there and we weren't sure which roads were open, etc. So instead we made a detour to Saguaro National Park. We've been to Saguaro before. It has 2 different districts in it, and we started here with the Rincon Mountain District, the eastern part of the park, which we had not seen on our previous trip. And there we did a hike on the Mica View Trail. 0.9 miles, took us 1 hour. It was 93 degrees when we started and 100 degrees when we finished. Then we drove to the western part of the park where the visitor center is, and also through nearby Tucson Mountain Park, which had absolutely large forests of these saguaro cacti, and everywhere you looked, it was saguaros. It was really, really quite impressive. Then back in the western side of Saguaro, we drove to the Red Hills Visitor Center and the Bajada Dirt Road. Had a picnic at the Seuss picnic area, and then went up Signal Hill where they have these petroglyphs in order to catch some sunset photos. Stayed up there getting that low angle light on the prickly pear cactus and the saguaro cactus backlit by the sun, and just watched as the sun went down. It's just us and one other couple that was out there at the time. Their characteristic Arizona views. Day 7, another early rise at 7 in the morning, 63 degrees. We drove to the Peralta Trailhead near Mesa, Arizona, and drove back 6 miles on a dirt road and then hiked to Weaver's Needle. It was a 4.6 mile round trip hike, 1,371 foot elevation gain. We hiked from 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and it was 93 degrees. Had a little bit of trouble on the trail here, getting used to the strenuousness of hiking that much elevation gain. But the views were absolutely stunning. Beautiful wildflowers along the way, and nice views back of the valley from where we had hiked up. Weaver's Needle, one of the students that was there had just graduated. He was missing his graduation to do this hike. Says he's a native, local. He says the best hike in Arizona. Day 8, we drove 195 miles from Mesa, Arizona to Sedona. Along the way, we saw a sign for Montezuma Well and Montezuma Castle National Monument, and being National Park geeks, we decided we had to stop. This natural well here is full of leeches because of the salinity, and there's Arizona sycamore trees and columbine growing in the area, and the Indians built their cliff dwellings here. This is Montezuma's Castle National Monument, just south of Sedona, Arizona. Then we drove north to Sedona itself. This is Bell Rock. And we tried to find views of Cathedral Rock. We did a little hike here to Cathedral Rock and were able to capture some pictures across the river here, Oak Creek. This is the courthouse. And then we went around to the other side of Cathedral Rock, and I did a little rock scramble up the side and had these views of the valley below. And then finally, at the end of the day, we drove to the Chapel of the Holy Cross. Day 9, we drove 335 miles from Sedona, Arizona to Las Vegas. First thing in the morning, we get up at 5:30, and we're on the trail at 6:15 to Devil's Bridge from the Mescal parking lot. 4.3-mile round trip, 800-foot elevation gain. And then we went to Birthing Cave, where it's very hard to get good pictures of Birthing Cave. You have to go really far back into the cave in order to look out, and it's a kind of a sandstone ledge in there. It's kind of slippery, hard to get back to. Drove on to Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, then drove the Las Vegas Strip before finding a boondocking site just outside of Las Vegas on BLM land. Day 10, got up at 4 a.m. and drove all the way to Death Valley National Park for the sunrise views at Zabriskie Point. If you're going to Death Valley, you have to get up and go to sunrise at Zabriskie Point. Get the low angle light here on that point. It's absolutely amazing, and is probably one of my favorite pictures from the trip was here at Zabriskie Peak. Then we drove into Furnace Creek and got ourselves a campsite and drove down the road to Badwater, stopping at Artist Palette Drive along the way, where you have these beautiful colors from the different minerals, and then ending at Badwater itself. Badwater Basin is the lowest point in the United States. It's really hot there, so we did not stay at Badwater. We went back up the road to Natural Bridges, did a little hike there. And then we went back into Furnace Creek and decided to drive out to Beatty, a town just outside the park, for lunch. Well, everything was closed in Beatty. It almost looked like this Rye Lake ghost town along the way. This is the Harmony Borax Works, 20 Mule Team Borax. And then the afternoon, when the lighting was a little bit lower in the sky, we decided to go back to Artist Palette. And then finally, we drove out toward Panamint Springs at the end of the day to the Mesquite Sand Dunes, where we were able to catch the low angle lighting here and stay for sunset on the sand dunes. Get some beautiful pictures and use that late afternoon golden hour light to take some pictures of ourselves as well. There's my beautiful bride, and even a nice picture of myself there. And watch the sunset down behind the sand dunes, and drove back to Furnace Creek for overnight. Next day, 215 miles from Furnace Creek to Lone Pine, California, which is in the Sierra Nevadas. First, we get up and had sunrise, 4:40 wake up at Dante's Peak. Again, if you're in Death Valley, make sure you're there for every sunrise and every sunset. Some beautiful pictures from Dante's Peak early in the morning. And then we drove down to Badwater, and it was still nice and cool. By cool, I mean like 82 degrees, and partly in the shade when we started walking out. We had to walk out over a mile, so it was a 2-mile round trip in order to see the typical hexagonal salt formations that are out there. We were the only ones out there at that time. Then we hopped in the car and drove out of Death Valley to Alabama Hills, which is in the foot of the Sierra Nevadas. Mount Whitney is the largest peak in the lower 48, and it's there in the distance. Alabama Hills is one of the sites that I was really looking forward to. It's a typical van life destination, good boondocking there, and nice hiking. Here's where we did a little trail to a bunch of different arches. A lot of movies were filmed here in Alabama Hills. Western movies and stuff like that. And they have even a movie road, and you can get a map of all the different movie sites if you want. Here's Mobius Arch. And we did some hiking around the arches, and then we drove out Movie Road looking for a place to camp. And right there on the top of the hill on Movie Road, probably the primo spot in the entire place, there was an empty pull-off, and that was our free boondocking site for the night right there. You looked out the van to one side, you had this view of the Sierra Nevadas. You look out the other side, you had this nice arch up on the hill called the Eye. So of course we had to hike up there and see what the Eye was looking at. Nice views from up on the hillside there. Good picture there of Jessica's shadow. And there you're looking back down the road where our van is parked for our free boondocking site. Probably the best boondocking site we had on this trip. We hiked back up the hill for sunset and then just watched as the clouds turned red over the Sierra Nevadas. And it became twilight. And the moon came out, and there was beautiful moonlight in the cumulus clouds above. On Sunday, May 15th, for the third straight day, we woke up before the sun, up at 5:15 in the morning to go see Mobius Arch with Mount Whitney lighted up in the background. We then left Alabama Hills and headed back through Death Valley, past Mesquite Sand Dunes, and over past Las Vegas to the Valley of Fire State Park in Nevada, where we went to the Beehive, and at Lattle Rock, where there are these petroglyphs. And there's also Arch Rock there. And then we did a hike and Fire Wave, to the Fire Wave. It was very hot, over 100 degrees, and it was late afternoon sun. It lived up to its reputation, the Valley of Fire. So the Fire Wave is similar to the Wave in Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. However, you don't need a permit to get to it. While we were at Valley of Fire State Park, after hiking to the White Domes and driving out Fire Canyon Road, we got a campsite in the park. And for the third day in a row as well, I used my German to speak to our German neighbor in the campsite. And he was leaving the next morning, so he left us with 9 bottles of beer and a big box full of firewood, and also gave us one of his steaks. This is one of my favorite pictures there of the road in Valley of Fire National Park, State Park. This is on Fire Canyon Road right here. And had a nice sunset there. Next day, we get up and drove 195 miles from Valley of Fire to the edge of Zion National Park in Springdale, Utah. This was pretty much a work day for us, where we got some... Jessica got her bike tire repaired, and we did some laundry and so on. And then we went into Zion National Park in the evening, sat by the Virgin River there with the watchmen, and then drove the Zion Mount Carmel Road from the west side of Zion National Park to the east side of the National Park. Seeing some bighorn sheep along the way, and emerging on the east side of the park at the famous checkerboard mesa. We then drove about 5 miles outside the park and 1 mile up a BLM road to a campsite on the top of a hill, and had beautiful views, and a bison walked right through our campsite. Next morning, we got up early and we drove to Zion Ponderosa Ranch and Resort, where we got a shuttle to the trailhead for Observation Point. So this, I think, is one of Zion National Park's best kept secrets. We can hike out to Observation Point, which is actually higher than the famous Angel's Landing Trail, and only has 200 and some feet of elevation gain as well. So it's a lot easier hike, and it was shaded as well. And we had these beautiful views of the Virgin River Valley. It was a good hike, though, a nice long hike. And then in the afternoon, we drove to the west side of the park again, and Jessica completed her Zion half marathon. Same boondocking site, and the next morning we get up and drove again to the west side of the park, where we hiked to Lower Emerald Pools, a little waterfall that comes off the edge of a cliff there. And then we hiked along the famous and very popular Riverside Walk to the Narrows. The park is very crowded this time of year, and it was very hot. In the late afternoon, we cooled off in the Virgin River. Jessica did a little mountain bike ride on the Parus Trail. And then we enjoyed our evening at the same boondocking site. Next morning, got up and drove from Zion National Park to Bryce Canyon. And we got up early for sunrise at Sunset Point. Looked at all the beautiful hoodoos in the early morning light. So Bryce Canyon is actually an amphitheater, not a canyon. It was not carved by a river. So these hoodoos just eroded away from water seeping into them, cracking and when it froze, and then the erosion of wind after that. This is Thurs hammer. So in the morning at Bryce, it was 49 degrees when we get up and 69 degrees by the end of our hike. We did a 3.3 mile loop on the Navajo Loop Trail. And then we went down and connected it with the Queen's Garden. This is in the Queen's Garden area right now. There's Jessica. And there's the formation that supposedly resembles the Queen. A lot of these hollowed out arches that you walk through. It's beautiful scenery. And you're down in amongst the hoodoos. And then we climbed back out. It was a pretty strenuous hike to get back out of the Queen's Garden. And back up to Sunrise Point, and we hiked over to Sunset Point. And then we drove out the scenic road to Natural Bridge and to this Agua Canyon area, Ponderosa Canyon, and then Rainbow Point, and then finally ended up at Inspiration Point and Bryce Point for beautiful views of the amphitheater. Then I hiked down Wall Street, so down a bunch of switchbacks off the Navajo Loop Trail, in among the hoodoos to the bottom of the, quote, canyon, and then did the switchback trail back up. So pretty long day of hiking. A nice panorama there of the overall amphitheater. And then we did boondocking outside in the Dixie National Forest. Day 17, we get up and drove to Kodachrome Basin State Park, which is on the edge of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And we did a hike there, overlooking these colorful mountain ranges. And then we took a 21-mile round-trip road, dirt road, washboard road, out to Grosvenor Arch, one of the most scenic arches in all of Utah, and Utah has well over 1,000 arches. It was worth the bumpy ride. Next, we drove to Escalante Petrified Forest State Park, and we did a short hike there looking at the petrified wood. Not as impressive as Petrified Forest National Park, which we had later in the trip, but is our first view of petrified wood there. And Jessica scared a mountain lion. We heard it in the brush going meow, meow. Pretty interesting. Another beautiful sunset. Next day, we continued in Grand Staircase Escalante. We got up early and we went to Lower Calf Creek Falls and did a hike out to see the falls. So this was a 6.2 mile round trip, 229-foot elevation gain. Took us from about 8 in the morning to 11. And beautiful views along the way. Lush Creek, Gamble Oak, Box Elder, striated canyon walls. Had a Mexican lunch, and then we went to Capitol Reef National Park and the Mormon town of Fruta, where they still have orchards. We drove in the scenic road, and then I did the hike up to Cassidy Arch. So here I am at the beginning of the hike, and there you can see Cassidy Arch in the distance. It was very hot, and I had not refilled my water bladder, so I ran out of water on the way up. Not a good thing. Had to borrow some water from a stranger coming down. Then we continued this scenic drive in Capitol Reef and went and sought out our boondocking site for the night. This is a one-room schoolhouse in Fruta and the interior of it. So we camped on Vista Ridge, and there was a little scrape bottom kind of going in the bump over the cattle grate there. We later found out that that loosened our running board. Next morning, got up and drove to Hickman Bridge, and also had another mishap with the van. As I parallel parked, I backed into a car that was behind me that I didn't see. Did the hike anyway to Hickman Bridge, and then went out to Cathedral Loop area and drove on to Goblin Valley State Park. A very interesting park where all these hoodoo formations look like little goblins, and you can just go out and adventure amongst them. There's no trail or anything like that. You just go and walk in amongst the different hoodoos and have these amazing views. There's Jessica with her water pack on. This place reminded me a little bit of the Bisty Badlands, which we saw a little bit later on in the trip in northern New Mexico. There are the Three Sisters. Then not too far from here, from Goblin Valley, was the slot canyon called Little Wild Horse Canyon. So we hiked in there just to get a feel for what a slot canyon was. And then we drove to Moab. And on BLM land there, we shared a campsite with some nice people that we just met there and had another beautiful sunset. On May 23, we made another detour. After being 2 days ahead of schedule, we went to Arches National Park. In 2022, in order to get into Arches, you have to have a timed reservation or go in before 6 a.m. So we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove in, hiked in the dark to Delicate Arch so we could watch sunrise at Delicate Arch. On our previous trip to Delicate Arch, I was too afraid to walk around the basin and to get close to the arch, but this time I said, the hell with it. I'm just going to go and walk over and stand right underneath the arch. So there I am, raising my arms under the arch. This is called Twisted Donut Arch, and it offers a nice view of Delicate Arch in the background. Here's Double Arch. At Double Arch, I followed another person and climbed up into this opening for views out the back. There I am, but then I kind of got stuck and I didn't know how to get my way back down. Here's Turret Arch, and then we went in the windows area to the north and south window. This is the window from behind. Then we drove to the Devil's Garden area and did a hike on a trail. We hiked out to see Tunnel Arch and Pine Tree Arch. And then one of the longest, skinniest arches, Landscape Arch. And then I hiked a little further to Partition Arch and to Navajo Arch. Then we drove back out the road to see Balanced Rock. We spent the night again at a different boondocking spot in Moab. The next morning we get up and went to Canyonlands National Park, completing our round of Utah's Mighty 5 National Parks, which includes Zion, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, Arches, and Canyonlands. Went first to Mesa Arch with the views of the mesa below, then to Upheaval Dome, a salt dome uplift, and then to the Green River Overlook and Grand View Point. Nearby is Dead Horse Point State Park, where the cowboys wrangled wild horses to a narrow point and then chose the ones they wanted and left the others to starve. We then drove back to Moab, south on the highway past Wilson Arch to the Needles district of Canyonlands, where we have newspaper rock here with a large number of pictographs from many different generations. The next day was our big day at Monument Valley. We had been to Monument Valley before, but only the outside like this. This is from Forrest Gump Point. We had never driven the 17-mile loop road down in the valley, so we paid our $16 to drive the 17-mile loop dirt road down in the valley. We could see the different formations. And along this road, the first half mile in, which will be the last half mile back out, there you can see it. There's a large sandy hill that you have to go up. We got stuck about halfway up. I had to back down in the van without the benefit of a rear view mirror and then try to get back up again. Then we met Tony, our guide, who drove us an hour and a half on these bumpy roads and sandy washes to the top of Hunts Mesa. This was a special treat that we had booked well in advance. Cost over $1,000, but it was just Tony and the two of us on top of Hunts Mesa with these incredible views of the Monument Valley down below. So we get up there around 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had time to ourselves. Tony showed us where to go for sunset pictures. I flew my drone, and then he prepared us a campfire in the meantime. So we sat there and watched the sunset, and it was absolutely an incredible experience. Just so still and quiet and peaceful. Swallow swooped down over the canyon, and we were just one with nature. The sun set, and Tony was supposed to cook us dinner over the cedar fire, and we couldn't find him. Where was Tony? Tony was missing. Checked in his tent, checked in the car, called for him. He was nowhere to be found. Here he was out collecting firewood in the dark. Came back with a bloody nose. We slept well in our sleeping bags there, hearing the coyotes howl with the beautiful, amazing stars out. And then Tony drove us in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, for sunrise to a different part of Hunts Mesa. And it was just like heaven being up there. I really honestly felt like I was in heaven. The views were just a photographer's paradise. Then we drove back down the bumpy road, and Tony took us to see a few things on our way back to Monument Valley. We stopped along the way at an arch called Spiderweb Arch. There it is. And then he also took us to see this Anasazi ruin at the base of Ruins Arch. That was the highlight of the trip for both of us, going to Hunts Mesa and experiencing Monument Valley like no other. We then drove to Page, Arizona and stopped at Horseshoe Bend for our Instagram photos. And it was really, really hot, so we made a Vanlife detour. Instead of going to Vermilion Cliffs, we drove to the north rim of the Grand Canyon and boondocked in the Kaibab National Forest. Got up the next morning in time for sunrise over the east rim of the Grand Canyon. It was really cool and windy there, about 20 degrees cooler than it was in Page, Arizona, so we had made the right choice. The north rim of the Grand Canyon is the least visited. It's about 200 miles by drive from the south rim, but only a few miles as the crow flies. And we were there Memorial Day weekend, and early in the morning, pretty much had the place to ourselves. For these self-timer photos, I had set the phone up in the thorny branches of a bush as my tripod. Then there's a scenic drive that you can take on the north rim that will take you out to different points, including Point Imperial and Roosevelt Point. At Roosevelt Point, I climbed out to the overlook there. And then you can go on to Cape Royale at the end of the scenic loop. In the evening, we drove back to Page, Arizona, where it was still hot, and we boondocked in a Walmart parking lot, unfortunately. Next day, we drove 145 miles from Page, Arizona to Tucson, Arizona. But first, we had a guided tour of Upper Antelope Canyon. We had done this before, and it was a little cloudy when we did it before, so we decided to do it again on this trip, and it was cloudy again. So the Navajo guys drive you out in a big 4x4 to the entrance to the Slot Canyon, and then they guide you through the Slot Canyon. It's really a tourist operation, and I don't think I would recommend it again. But if you're a photographer, you have to go at least once to see what the light looks like inside the Slot Canyon. Then we drove to the south rim of the Grand Canyon coming in from West Rim Drive. And we stopped at some of the overlooks, including Desert View and the Watchtower, and the Tusayan Ruins, and Moran Point and Grandview Point. This was now Saturday, Memorial Day weekend, and we found the spot only 4 miles outside the park entrance in the Kaibab National Forest, free campsite. On Sunday, we explored the Grand Canyon South Rim, getting up again at sunrise for sunrise over the Grand Canyon at Mather Point. Bearing in mind, this is now Sunday, Memorial Day weekend. So there were quite a few photographers out already at that hour at Mather Point. And then we took the shuttle. You have to take a shuttle bus on the South Rim because it's more crowded in the summertime. Took the shuttle to the South Kaibab Trailhead, and we hiked down to U'a Point. And then we took another shuttle to Bright Angel Trailhead, and we had coffee and muffins at the Lookout Studio there. And then finally we took another shuttle bus to Hopi Point and a hike from Hopi Point back to Powell Point before taking our final shuttle back to the visitor center at the end of the afternoon. We got in the van, had a nice salad, and then drove to Holbrook, Arizona, to the entrance to Petrified Forest National Park. They locked the gates to Petrified Forest at 7:30 so that looters don't come in and steal the wood. Unfortunately, there's lots of gift shops that sell it just outside the park. And we drove to Crystal Forest inside the park there, where there's just hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pieces of petrified wood all over the valley there. It was extremely windy, and we drove around there and then camped in the parking lot outside the Crystal Forest gift shop. And the next morning we drove back into Petrified Forest to explore the rest of the park. Driving farther north, so driving from south to north, we stopped at the Long Logs Trail and the Agate House. And we saw this nice collared lizard. Then we saw Old Faithful Petrified Tree and drove north to the Blue Mesa. The Blue Mesa, we took a loop trail, 1.0 miles down into the valley there. It was a steep hill climbing back out, let me tell you. A little farther up the road, we stopped at the teepees. There are the teepees. And then there was Puerto Pueblo ruins with a newspaper rock of their own there. And we saw an antelope. Route 66 had passed through the park at one point, so there's an old Studebaker there. And then farther north in the park, we got to the Painted Desert and stopped at the overlooks along the way, including the Painted Desert Inn, where we got some nice ice cream after having our picnic lunch. Then we drove north to Thoreau, New Mexico, and boondocked in the Bisty Badlands parking lot. On Memorial Day, the day after Memorial Day, we got up and went to the Bisty Badlands in the Day Na Zin Wilderness. So this is like an otherworldly experience in northern New Mexico in the Four Corners area, where you just hike out. There's no trail. You just hike out and you try to find these different formations called the Cracked Eggs and Hoodoo City, the Flat Tops, different features that have been named by photographers. There's some petrified wood. That's called the Ostrich. And so basically you're just hiking using landmarks and GPS to help you. There's absolutely no trails. This is the Rock Garden and the Valley of Bones, and you're trying to find these different sites to photograph. There is the Alien Woman. And these are called the manta rays. It's really kind of a unique experience, the Winged Rock. So after spending the whole morning at the Bisty Badlands, we hiked for 7.6 miles out there in the wilderness. Found our way back to the parking lot. And then we drove this long dirt road to Chaco Canyon National Historic Park. It was a 13-mile dirt road in. There were a couple sand washes we had to pass through. And it was really bumpy, let me tell you. Our dishes were falling off the shelves. So we were hoping it was going to be worth it. So we get there and it's amazing. There's all these well intact pueblos from the early Anasazi Indians. And there's one called Hungo Pavi and Chetro Kettle, which had an amazing kiva. A kiva is a ceremonial room. These are the circular rooms that you see in the pictures. And interesting and sophisticated masonry. Then there was an entire village called Pueblo Bonito, and you could even walk inside some of the rooms there and explore the architecture. And then there was another one called Pueblo del Arroyo, which had lots of different kivas in it. And then finally we stopped at Casa Rinconada, which had an absolutely amazingly large kiva that was pretty tall. And it was like, in the middle of nowhere, all of these different cultures came together, and there were over 1,000 inhabitants at one point in time. And they traded as far away as Mexico and the California coast. Then we had to drive back out that bumpy dirt road again. And we eventually stopped at an RV park called Teresa's RV Park in Cuba, New Mexico, where Teresa charged us $10 to park there and have 2 hot showers. And on the next day, we then drove to near Los Alamos, New Mexico, to Bandelier National Monument, another Puebloan relic here. This area was formed by eruption of the Jemez Mountains, which left a layer of volcanic ash that then hardened. And the Indians, the Pueblo and Hopi Indian ancestors, lived in the caves at the base of these mountains and also built structures outside, We stopped there for lunch and got Doug's Famous Burger, the most famous burger in New Mexico. And then we drove into Los Alamos proper, where we were going to go to the Bradbury Science Museum and meet up with our friends from high school for dinner. We broke our cardinal rule, however, and did not find our boondocking site before dark. And we were in some sketchy areas of Española, so we had to drive back to Los Alamos and stealth camp in the Holiday Inn parking lot because all the hotels were full. Then we drove to Taos, New Mexico, and the pueblo there is apparently still closed due to pandemic. So we moved on to Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. Happy to leave New Mexico behind us. The Great Sand Dunes is also one of the newer national parks. You can hike on the sand dunes and climb up to the top. I think it's like 625 feet elevation for the highest sand dune there. So the first day we just rested and took a little walk out in the sand dunes, then found our boondocking spot right outside the park here with absolutely stunning sunset. And then the next morning we get up and we drove into the park at sunrise, got that low angle light on the sand dunes, and before the heat of the day we went out and did our hike up the sand dunes. It's quite strenuous hiking on sand because every step you take you slide back and you sink into the sand. And so we made it up almost to the top, not quite to the top this time. I was running out of water and Jessica was having issues struggling climbing the sand dunes. But here are the views from near the top out the back with the mountains in the background there. And it was just, some beautiful scenery. Next day was basically a driving day. So we drove 401 miles to Missouri and then stopped here at Graham Cave State Park, where we had a nice campfire, and they had some atlatl throwing going on. Next day, drove 560 miles to Barboursville, West Virginia. And then on day 34, we drove to New River Gorge National Park, the most recent national park, National Park number 63 in the park system. And we went to the Grand View Overlook there, where there's a bend in the New River. Saw the New River Gorge Bridge, and then drove the one-way, very narrow Fayette Station Road, which takes you down underneath the bridge and gives you views from inside the canyon. And then finally, we boondocked just outside Summersville Lake and the Gauley National Recreation Area before driving 604 miles home on day 35 in the rain. Hope you enjoyed the slideshow. I'd just like to wrap this up by asking you to click that subscribe button down in the lower right corner if you enjoyed my videos, and you can check out some of my earlier content, and stay tuned for future trips. And to summarize this trip, we were gone for 35 days. We left 2 days after my last class of the semester and 1 day after my wife retired from her job of 28 years. Hopped in the van and drove for 35 days, 9,135 miles. We kept track of every expense. It cost us $5,503.15. About 50% of that was transportation costs. And a large chunk of our experiences costs was our most popular and favorite thing that we did on the vacation, which was our overnight stay at Hunts Mesa in Monument Valley. Absolutely amazing experience, as I already explained to you in the video. And that was our top number one for both of us. Number two for me, I think, was boondocking in Alabama Hills. It was a van life destination I looked forward to for a long time, and it lived up to its reputation. And number three was either Death Valley or the Bisty Badlands. I think the Bisty Badlands was kind of a otherworldly experience. And it was a different experience by having to go out in the wilderness and blaze your own trail. Death Valley was very photogenic, but it was also very hot at the same time. So in terms of the actual van, we didn't really have any problems. I had a little fender bender, but other than that, the van behaved perfectly. All the systems inside, the solar, etc., we never had any problems. The fridge ran well, and it was just an ideal way to travel. Like, you know, if you don't mind going a number of days without a shower, and it's really not such a big deal, or not having a toilet, you know, just going in a pea cup or outside, this is the way to go. I mean, you don't have to set up your tent. You have complete flexibility. Like I said earlier, you know, we showed up at the Grand Canyon Memorial Day weekend on Saturday night and easily found the spot just 4 miles outside the entrance. So I'm incredibly sold on van life, and I can't wait to get out there and do it again.